Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film, the latest new release, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Michael, we are joined by our special guest. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself? He's been on the pod a bunch of times, one of our favorite fellow podcast friends, and we're excited to dive into this movie with him. So, yeah, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Michael Burgett. I am the host of the Screen Nerds podcast, a podcast for film lovers, by film lovers, and I am super excited to have been selected by the Movies and Us team to dive into Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning.
Woohoo! I think this is going to be a really fun episode. I'm curious to hear everybody's takes about all the different choices that this movie makes. So I think this will be a good time. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning? This title is a little less long than I think the previous movie, which was like Dead Reckoning Part 1, so many things happening. So a little shorter of a film title to say.
It's shorter and there's fewer punctuation marks, which is very nice. But the IMDb summary is: our lives are the sum of our choices. Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning.
All right. And in Movies and Us tradition, we start off with our one-sentence summaries for the film. Michael, I'm curious to hear what yours is.
Mine is actually in the form of a question, and it is: Ethan Hunt wants to do what now?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's like the that could be the slogan for the entire franchise as well.
Yeah, and even more so
good.
in this one.
Yeah. And he's like, trust me. And I'm like, okay, all right, my dude. Sarah, what is your one sentence summary?
Mine is: Luther is the GOAT.
Yes, he is. He is. That's great. There's some great Luther moments in this movie. All right, my one sentence summary is: the Mission Impossible franchise's end of summer camp montage video.
Indeed. There are a lot of montages in this movie.
Lots of throwbacks. Okay, so let's roundtable, temp check our high-level thoughts about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. We're not going to spoil the movie quite yet in this section, but I'm curious to hear how everyone's feeling about this movie. And then after that, we'll dive in, we'll get specific on the things that worked, the things that didn't work for us, and some of the big choices and moments that happened in this film. So, Michael, actually, also in this section, I would love to hear maybe everyone's relationship to the franchise. Are you a fan? Are you just here for the vibes? Where do you fall on that spectrum too, as you share? Maybe share that first and then your thoughts about the movie at a high level. So, Michael, curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I am a huge fan of the series, both of the TV and the film. I mentioned it in my rescreen episode of Mission Impossible 2 that I did a couple weeks ago, that I was introduced to the Mission Impossible series as a kid with the revival series in 1988. That was the one that when I first found out about Mission Impossible, it was because of that series. And as an 8-year-old kid watching it, it was just like mind-blowing of like everything that they was doing and all the different missions and all that. And so it really sparked a love for it. Now, I never saw the 60s TV series until way later, but it was that 80s TV series that really got me interested. And so when the first Mission Impossible film came out in 96, it was like everything like was adding up for me. It was, the mid 90s. So like Tom Cruise was like full Tom Cruise. You had my love for the TV series. And so everything just like worked together. And then I saw the first film and then I hated it because of one choice that was made. And I'll save the talk about that for when we get into the spoiler part, because actually this film gets, into discussions about that one. So it was like, that was like a sour note for me. But then Mission Impossible 2, which is the one I did the rescreen episode on, it's a film that a lot of people don't like and it's their least favorite, but it's one of my favorites because it just was bonkers and awesome and fun and everything. And I talked, all about it in my episode, how much I love that film. But starting with that one and then moving up between 3 and then especially Ghost Protocol on, I really have loved this franchise and loved this series because it just has everything that enjoy, which is like the spy action thriller. There's the ridiculous stunts that Tom Cruise does, and then there's just a camaraderie between Ethan and Luther, and then Benji too. And so I love this series and I love everything that goes along with it. That being said, this film is a mixed bag for me because it has some really great moments. It has some really great action sequences, but it also has some questionable moments and things that I would like to have seen done differently. But overall, I enjoyed the film. But yeah, there's some things I'd be like, I don't know about that.
I'm excited to hear the things that really worked for you that maybe really landed. And then what were those, I don't know about that moments for you. So that'll be fun to talk about once we get into spoiler section. So, Sarah, relationship to Mission Impossible franchise, and then thoughts overall at a high level about this movie.
Yeah, I am a fan of the franchise. Not as big a fan as Michael is, but I have watched all of the movies. I rewatched all of them before the previous film, before Dead Reckoning came out, because I needed to see if my feelings about the franchise were still correct all these years later. And I will have to say my definitive rankings for Mission Impossible is, unlike Michael, the first one is my favorite and the second one is my least favorite. So I definitely fall into that camp of loving the first film a lot. And this franchise is just so much fun. It gets increasingly ridiculous, and so my love for it kind of has waned as things have gotten like way more out of control, but it's still a fun time in the theaters. It's a fun watch. And Luther is the GOAT. He is so great. I love Luther. He is the best. And so I feel very similarly to you, Michael. This was a mixed bag for me. There were some portions where I was like, okay, this is good. There are other portions where I was like, nah, dude, that's not the move. I think this film is too long and it leans too heavily into nostalgia, which I think actually works against it. But at the same time, I do think that it is a fitting end to the franchise. Could it have been better? Yes. But I think that it does enough to like tie a bow on this like 30-year run of Mission Impossible. So yeah, all in all, it was a little bit mixed for me.
All right. Mixed bags all around, it sounds like. So I think my relationship to the Mission Impossible series is I think I've seen some number of the movies. I could not tell you what happens in a lot of them. I'm here for the vibes. I'm here for a good time, but probably not like big super fan, maybe the way that you are, Michael. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this, and especially in the way that they kind of paid homage to the franchise in general in this film. I think maybe I'm the most positive about this film. I think there's definitely some things that didn't work. There's some aspects that I actually think worked better in the movie right before this one, especially around the AI bit and world building that I think they could have played up even more in this film to make it really like culturally relevant for the time that we're in, but also help make some of the emotional beats between the characters maybe even land harder by playing up those things a little bit more. On the whole, I had a really great time at the movies with this film. I saw it on a Saturday night with a packed theater. Like there were barely any spots left. So that was really fun just to like be at the movies with a crowd of people that were really loving this. And overall, I think that this film is just really good nature. The franchise and the characters are so good nature. It tugs on all of the heartstrings. So I loved that. I think that was it's just timely maybe for what I was needing and wanting, just to see all of these earnest characters try and do their best and band together. Like we need more of that here in 2025. So I had a great time with all of that, with all the action set pieces. So I had a good time with this movie, but some things that could have been better.
Could I take one moment to give you your flowers, Jen?
Okay, I'm ready to receive them with wide open arms.
So if I listened to the Dead Reckoning episode of Movies and Us prior to
Mm.
watching the Final Reckoning, which if you haven't, go check out their episode on Dead Reckoning. It's really good. But in that episode, that was back when it was still Dead Reckoning Part 1, and this
Yeah.
film was supposed to be Part 2. And I remember listening to it and hearing you talk about, like, thinking of some ideas of how to rename this second film, and you, Jen, called it. You said The Final Reckoning, and this was over a year before they actually
What?
changed the name of it. So I want to make sure that it's on record that you, Jen, called it. You said it way before anybody
Oh
else
my
did.
God.
So you definitely get your flowers.
One, I'm so impressed you did your homework and somehow listened to us yap for an hour before watching this movie. But two, I totally forgot that we had that whole bit. Sarah, do you remember this? I don't remember that. So I'm glad to be reminded of ideas that I had that came to pass, I suppose. I had totally forgotten about that. So Sarah, do you remember this bit?
I only remembered it when Michael pointed it out. Like,
Wow. Great
so
job,
yeah,
Michael.
absolutely.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, The Final Reckoning. It's kind of an epic name. Glad my past self, I guess, thought of it. All right, well, let's give a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, we're about to dive fully into this movie and talk about all of the plot points, choices, character moments that unfold in this film. So maybe let's start on a high note and then, and then we'll go into some qualms. So what worked in this movie for both of you? What really landed?
Well, I have to go first with what Sarah mentioned about Luther, and the relationship between Ethan and Luther is something that definitely worked. And I think part of that goes back to the fact that we've had 7 movies prior where they built this relationship up together. And so when we have this kind of a crescendo moment with them, and unfortunately, we lose Luther early in the film, but the work that was put into it with him developing the poison pill to use on the machine to end the entity, and then the voiceover at the end really, I think, encapsulates everything that works with that relationship and the bond and the friendship that those two had over the course of all these films. And so that was something that truly resonated. And it really does show that Luther is the MVP. He is the GOAT, because not only is he a great technical wizard, not only is he a great emotional support person for Ethan, but he's just a really great dude. And so that was one thing that definitely worked for me. And even though we get not as much of him here, it really does kind of go back to the fact that he was kind of the rock, the the one true guy that was there throughout all of it for Ethan. And so definitely that was something that definitely worked.
Yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, like, I'm very sad that they had to kill off Luther, but I think it was such a fitting end for that character too, because he has been such a steady rock. He has been so honorable the entire time. Like, obviously, he is this incredible tech wizard, but I love that you get to see him just having this very, like, moral stand, protecting not only his friend, but, like, saving the city with his sacrifice. Like, it was such a fitting way to bid farewell to this character that I just love. He's the best. He is one of my favorite parts of the Mission Impossible series. And then the fact that he really does save the day. And without Luther, they would have been completely screwed. So I appreciate that this film really does give him that honor. It's a lot about Ethan because, Tom Cruise has a death wish, so he's doing all of these stunts. But I love that this film really went out of its way to highlight how important Luther is, not just to Ethan, but to the franchise and the mission as a whole.
And I thought it was so smart and so wise for the film to end with Luther's voiceover and that final recorded message. I remember Luther saying when they're saying their goodbyes to each other and putting the poison pill back into Luther's coat and whatnot, or pocket, around him saying like, "Oh, I left a message for you in there," and I'd kind of forgotten that until after Ethan completes his mission and you start to hear Luther's voice, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot that we get to actually have one more moment with this character that had died already like 20 minutes earlier in the movie. And it was such a wise and such a emotional choice to have that be the like kind of final ending and not have an Ethan voiceover at the end. So that was just also a really beautiful homage at the end of the final voice we hear is actually getting to hear Luther's just dropping knowledge and wisdom and beauty into our ears as we're seeing all those final shots of the film. So that was really, really deeply emotional and such a great choice.
Yeah, and especially since, we didn't actually get to see him at the end, it was nice to have his voice be the one that kind of sends off the film, because he is such a staple of the series, and just as much as Ethan is a staple of the series, Luther is that too, and so it was nice to have him be a part of kind of like the ending of what was taking place. Another thing that really I really, really enjoyed, and it was something that I didn't expect to have enjoyed or even thought was going to be like a real big thing, was the character and the return of William Donlow, the guy who was in the first film where Ethan broke into the CIA and barely got out, and he was, the station where Ethan broke in was where this guy was working, and so finding out that this character was brought back in the way that he was brought back, and hearing his story of how he ends up in the Aleutian Islands working on this remote base, doing recordings and stuff, and getting married and having a life there, and him being the one that kind of helps crack the code for finding the submerged submarine and everything that he did as far as helping also to defuse the bomb at the end. I really loved that kind of a redemption arc of a character that had no idea even needed a redemption arc, but the character and the actor too, that they brought the same actor back, and it was really cool. And especially the scene in the airplane when they're flying to South Africa and they're going to do this final mission or whatever, and Ethan is talking to Donlow and he's saying, "Man, I'm so sorry that I ruined your life," because that's what Ethan thought. He had regrets thinking that, he caused this guy to get sent to the middle of nowhere because of, what he did. And Donlow was basically said, "No, like I found myself here in Alaska. I found the love of my life. I found something that meant a whole lot more than sitting in a cubicle in Washington." And so I love that character and I love that arc, and it was just so very cool. And so that was something that unexpectedly happened, and I very much thought it was like a definite highlight of this film.
Yeah, I was also surprised at, number one, how much screen time he got and how well that worked. I think there are a number of, I guess, emotional moments in this film that didn't really work for me, but that character totally worked, I thought. I really enjoyed it, and it felt like a natural way to call back to a previous film, whereas I feel like there are some other moments in this film that try to call back to a previous film that doesn't work as well. But yeah, that analyst, he brought so much, and I loved his wife too. She was so precious, and I loved her little sled dog instruction to Grace that she gives. That was perfect too. So I loved the pair of them, and that they got to come on this little adventure and really meaningfully contributed to this adventure too. They weren't just there to be this nice fluffy moment or to be a moment of nostalgia, but they were actually pretty integral to the plot, which was an interesting choice, but I think on the whole worked pretty well.
Yeah, and especially because Donlow, was smarter than everybody thought he was going to be. Because again, when we look back at the first film, it's like he's kind of portrayed as inept in a little bit, but here it's like he knows what he's doing. He got the codes or whatever, and whenever the Russians come in and try to get the codes from him, he transmits the wrong, what are seemingly the wrong codes, but the submarines and everybody kind of are able to figure out exactly what it is, and because he knows what he's doing. And so I really love the fact that this is kind of a redemption arc for him, looking back to that first film. And like you said, Sarah, this character was used very well as a callback to previous films, and it makes sense. And that there are other times when it's just member berries of like, oh, do you remember this? Or, oh, do you remember that? And they just don't really resonate, and they don't stick with you quite like his character and what he does. And yeah, his wife is tremendous, especially when her and Grace and one of the Russian soldiers go out to where the dogs are being fed, and she takes the shovel and tries to whack the guy, and he doesn't do anything, but then Grace ends up being the one kind of to take him out. But yeah, those two were a definite delight.
And what I loved as a like non Mission Impossible super fan and maybe is missing a lot of that like context or like memory of those movies is that he he feels like a whole character that contributes to this plot, contributes to the team, is integrated so fully in a meaningful way, even without that context. Like it sounds like them bringing this character back is meaningful for the franchise arc in general. But even as someone who's like, okay, like I kind of remember that scene and I don't remember the plot of that movie that well, I really appreciated that this character feels fully fleshed out and all of the emotional beats still landed just as well, maybe deeper for y'all that remember the backstory, but landed great for me as a viewer that doesn't have that context. And sometimes these big franchise IP pieces can do that, like, hey, remember this character? And they come and they're just kind of like there along for the journey. And the whole time I can feel the gap between the backstory that I might be missing and why that character is important. I didn't feel that strongly with this character. And I really appreciated that. The other thing that really worked for his arc in this movie is that we actually see him contribute to the mission in a really meaningful way. I mean, arguably, he is pivotal in helping save the world. And so when they have that whole emotional beat at the end there, when this character is saying, no, actually, this really changed my life. And please don't feel bad about it because I got to be here in this moment and contribute in this way. You really believe him that this was actually best for his life. And all of those things that might seem like setbacks or diversions or roadblocks along the way are actually unlocking like all your other multiverse strands of possibilities. Like I really bought that and believed that with his arc, knowing the context and then seeing how much he has been so pivotal to this mission and to this team. So I thought it was really neat to see the way that this film could weave in all of the big IP's franchise moments, reward the fans that really love and know these details very well. But then also for those of us like me that are in the audience, like it worked just as well too. So I really appreciate that a lot.
Another thing too that I really liked was the pairing of Benji and Paris. Those two had a great repartee between one another because Benji is always trying to like keep Paris from like killing everybody, and Paris is just like, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want. And it's through the course of the film they come to an understanding, and especially there in that silo where Paris is having to essentially save Benji's life. And it's like she has like no idea what she's doing, and like Benji is having to try to describe to her what to do because she even says herself that she doesn't save people, she kills people. And so the fact that she is able to help save Benji and they have this connection together, it was just something that made the film enjoyable, seeing them grow and seeing them work together in the way that they did.
Yeah. Paris is also just so cool. Like, anytime she's on screen, I'm like, yes, you go, girl, do your thing. I do wish that there had been like more opportunities for Paris to just be this really cool assassin, but it was nice to see, some some opportunities to see some different sides of Paris. She's a great assassin, but she can also do more things too. So that was nice, but I did want a little bit more Paris assassin moments. But the movie was already so long, we couldn't fit another Paris action sequence in. So I understand.
I love the moment where they're on the island and there's all of the Russian special forces in the building, and you just see in her eyes like she's ready to take some people out. And Theo's like, "No, we can't, not yet, not yet. You need to wait." But you just see that she is ready to like explode. And I thought all of those shots where you're seeing them communicate with each other with their eyes, and they're both kind of trying to discuss without speaking, just with their eyes, like, "Is this time yet? Nope, we need to wait a little longer. Nope. Okay, now we go." And then kind of the explosive action that happens right after that was a really great payoff. But they really built up the tension well in showing some of those shots where they're trying to communicate. And then we get the big explosive set piece. It was great.
And there's so much of that throughout the film, too, where they're having conversations with their eyes, which was just so fun to see. Because, I mean, that I feel like that's hard to do on screen and have that communicate everything that those scenes communicated. But we get that a number of times. And I feel like each time it was effective in taking us into this like assassin world and like understanding how competent they all are, and also increasing the tension and the stakes, because it's like, oh, are they gonna go? No, we gotta wait. Are they gonna go? Like, it created that tension and anticipation of this buildup that is imminent. We just don't know when exactly it's gonna happen.
And I think the music too did a really great job of conveying those emotions. When the times it needed to build up, it built up to a crescendo, and then when it needed to like lay back, it did that. And so that was something that I really thought worked very well. Was, as much as these films are known for their cinematography, which they are because they're phenomenal, but I think the music too really helped set the tone for what we were seeing on screen. And so wanted to make sure that got shout out too, because it was a phenomenal score that was used. And it's difficult, especially for a nearly 3-hour film, to have a score that is that consistently good. And I feel like that this one did.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so true. And in general, with the score, with iconic themes, I just appreciate that they didn't overdo it with the theme. I thought that when they used the theme and had that, come in, it was almost more effective because it gave me more of those goosebumps of like, oh, we're back. But I appreciate that they didn't overdo it, because sometimes they can do too much of the theme again and again. And you're like, oh, okay, it's kind of law of diminishing return. But they used it very efficiently, and it really packed a punch every time we got that Mission Impossible theme. I loved it. So I'm now curious to hear if there are parts that you wish were done differently. And especially, it's kind of an impossible task of trying to wrap up and have this kind of cherry on top of a incredible, iconic franchise. Like, how do you think this film did? And are there things that you would have wanted to see it do a little bit differently in the context of this being, quote unquote, the last movie of the franchise?
I think that's really the crux of the issue. Is this film is trying to not only be the second part of a 2-part film, but it's trying to wrap up 8 films. And I don't think it necessarily needed to do that, nor it should it have had the pressure of that being the case. Because I think if it was its own film, kind of like how a lot of the other films in the franchise were, because it really wasn't until you got to Rogue Nation where they started to like be more interconnected. It was more of just, hey, here's this one film, here's this one action, here's this one mission, and they all were kind of self-contained, especially with the fact that you had different directors with each one. You had Brian De Palma, you had John Woo, you had J.J. Abrams, you had Brad Bird. It wasn't until McQuarrie came on and has done these last 4 where it was all having to be like interconnected. And now this one having to reach back and tie into all those. I think that's where it's really at its weakest part, is because it's trying to tie everything up. is trying to be this send off while at the same time trying to tell a complicated story about AI and everything, and how that all kind of doesn't necessarily mesh anyway. And so when you have a villain that really isn't that compelling or relatable or understandable with the entity, when you have that going on, plus you're trying to incorporate all these other elements, I think that's what made the film kind of messy, and it drags at parts because it's trying to, you know, do all this with nearly 3 hours of runtime. It I always, heard this saying growing up. It's, trying to fit 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. I feel like that's what this film is it's trying to fit all these different things and elements and storylines, trying to pack it into this one film. And there are some great parts to it, but having not a compelling villain, having to try to tie everything up, I feel like it just suffers from that. And if it had just been like one story in one mission and trying to at least focus it down, or at the very least, in being just a 2-part film, be a little bit more focused on tying up the first part of the film, I think that would have worked better. But instead, it's just kind of bursting at the seams, trying to keep itself contained in this 1 3-hour film.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think for me too, the attempts at nostalgia for the most part didn't work for me. It didn't land for me. All the montages didn't I didn't need those. I didn't want those. And so I think one of the examples of the nostalgia really not working for me, and I think working to the detriment of the film, is when Ethan and Grace are captured pretty early in the film, and she's tied up and he's tied up, and immediately I thought of Mission Impossible 3, where Owen Davian is holding Ethan's wife hostage, and then Ethan has to go steal the rabbit's foot and all of that. And that immediately I thought of that scene. And as that scene plays out in The Final Reckoning, Gabriel specifically mentions that scene, and he mentions Owen Davian. And I was like, okay, so you're wanting me to think about Mission Impossible 3. That's cool. But I think this works to The Final Reckoning's detriment because Owen Davian is such a compelling villain, largely due to Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance. Like, I think that Owen is the best villain in the entire franchise because of Philip Seymour Hoffman. And as great as Isai Morales is, he is not Philip Seymour Hoffman. And so the whole time I was just trying to compare Gabriel to Owen Davian, and the two just do not compare to one another. And so in that moment, I'm like, well, why am I watching this movie when I could go be watching Mission Impossible 3? Because that villain rocked. Like, let's go watch that instead. So there were a couple moments like that throughout this film where they were trying to call back to a previous movie, and I just found myself thinking like, oh, well, why don't I just go watch that instead? Which is obviously not what the film intended me to do. But I think that's some of the danger sometimes with playing with nostalgia as heavily as this film does, is that it kind of makes you miss that other thing that we used to have instead of like really appreciating what we are currently in the middle of and this mission that we are in the middle of. And so I think that if this film hadn't leaned so heavily in the nostalgia, kind of like you were saying, Michael, just focusing on this mission, I think it, number one, would have been a shorter film, which would be good. And then number two, would have really helped us be grounded in this moment. And I feel like it still could have worked for a lot of it. You know, you could still have the tying everything up in a bow. This is just the last mission that we'll see these friends on. Like, we didn't need all of that nostalgia stuff. And I think that maybe could have helped this be a stronger film just in general.
Yeah, and speaking of the rabbit's foot, the use of retconning in this film, I think, really was a detriment too, because in trying to tie everything up, they had to retcon some stuff, and the rabbit's foot being like one of the main things, because in Mission Impossible 3, it was more of like a biological weapon that was, the MacGuffin that Ethan was, having to deal with. Whereas here, it's like, no, it wasn't a biological weapon. It was actually the proto entity. And it was like trying to like explain that in a way that makes it make sense in this film. I thought was I thought something it was something that didn't really work. And then the other thing was the fact of making Jasper Briggs, Shea Wiggum's character, the son of Jim
Yes.
Phelps. That
Yes.
when I heard that in that moment, I almost had to keep myself from laughing because I was like, really? This is what we're going with? And it felt like a pure nostalgia play to have, everyone think back to the first Mission Impossible film, which is why I genuinely disliked the film because of how they treated the Jim Phelps character and making him be a traitor at the end of that film when in every iteration of the TV series he's a good guy. And so that was something that soured me way back then, and now bringing it to this film and having Briggs be the son of Jim Phelps, it's like we already know this character from the previous film, and he's a guy that wants to get the job done, and the job is to bring Ethan in. It's like we didn't need to add this other layer of intrigue that to his character, because we already know his motives. We already know what he's wanting to do, and I felt like that addition to the story at the time, it didn't work, and I feel like that you could have gotten away with that and not had that there, especially given the fact that his partner ends up joining Ethan's team, and aside from the asking of is he still alive, Briggs doesn't care about his partner the rest of the film. Even when they get to South Africa and they're in the same space, like there's no acknowledgement of, oh, hey, and nothing of that sort. And so I just really I didn't like those elements of trying to retcon things to make them make sense in this film because you didn't, most of the times they weren't necessary anyway. And it was just more of just a ploy to try to go, hey, do you remember this? When in reality, it just wasn't necessary. And I think it just kind of bogged the story down.
And it's interesting because I feel like we're seeing a lot of big franchise IP want to do this. I was thinking a lot about James Bond and especially the Daniel Craig run of James Bond recently and how much that final movie for that character, Daniel Craig's version of James Bond, they tried to tell this big sprawling story and show how every villain has always been connected, and there were so many callbacks in that final movie as well to all of the previous foes and characters along the way that all got like woven together. So I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on why we think that the studios, the money-making machine of it all, of a franchise, feels the need to kind of tie everything together. Like every detail somehow needs to all be woven in this final movie because it's an approach that seems to be taken quite frequently. I was also thinking about The Matrix. I think it's Resurrections, the most recent one, that plays on nostalgia, but I think does it in a really clever way by, instead of just literally cutting in old footage of previous films into that new one, they have this premise of this game developer is now creating what was the Matrix movies that we saw. So we're getting to see all those same shots, but it's done in a more clever way with this kind of world building detail of the new movie that I thought was like a smart way to bring nostalgia in, but then also have it kind of make sense or like serve a purpose versus what they do in the James Bond franchise. And in this film, they literally just cut old scenes into the movie as they're like showing this new character that's somehow related to a previous character. So I'm curious your thoughts on, like, is it truly that studios feel like nostalgia sells, so like let's do it and play up the nostalgia? Are there other reasons that you think might be why?
I think that's part of it. I think there's always that idea of especially when a franchise is successful, you're wanting to kind of keep the momentum going, kind of stoke the fire. And so those nostalgia bits kind of help do that, especially if a franchise is going for a very long time. It kind of, it's thought of a way to kind of help keep it going. Even more so with the idea of like Marvel films and superhero films and how those universes are all interconnected and everything of how sprawling those stories are and the success of those films. Studios, you know, try to have their own kind of sprawling universes. Another series that, when I was watching these films, I kind of think about and how they're connected in that way is the Fast and Furious. That's a film franchise too that didn't start out being a sprawling universe kind of a franchise. It started out as like a simple theft film with race cars, and it grew and grew and grew into this behemoth that it is now. And it too, especially in the later films, was feeding into that nostalgia of what happened to it prior. And I think it gets to a point where studios almost think that they need to keep stoking that nostalgia fire to keep things going. But in reality, it just really goes back to telling good stories. And if you tell good stories, whether they're, big and sprawling or whether they're very intimate and narrow focused, they get the job done. And if you are heavily reliant on nostalgia and you don't have that story to back it up, it just kind of falls flat. And I feel like we've seen instances enough of that in recent years with films that are heavily focused on nostalgia and not as focused on telling the quality story, that we get kind of the films that we get. And it's unfortunate because some of these franchises have been going for a very long time and they deserve to have those quality stories keep going. But putting in that work to tell those stories, it takes a lot of effort, and it's a lot easier to just stoke the nostalgia fire than it is to tell quality stories.
And I think the other piece of this is that it's just hard to end things. Like the final movie or the final episode of TV, that is so hard to do because especially with something like Mission Impossible, like this is run for 30 years. Like this is a big deal. And even for just the like casual movie watcher, like people have seen at least one Mission Impossible movie. People have opinions about Mission Impossible. And so ending something is hard, just period. But then I think ending something that has been going on for 30 years, that is so pivotal, that has had so many like iconic moments, is going to be extra hard. And so I wonder if some of that nostalgia is almost this like, hey, remember you like us, like be nice to me as I'm ending this movie, which is really hard to do. But look at all this stuff that we've done that was really cool. So we're going to end it. Be nice to my movie. I wonder if there's some of that. Like, let me play up the nostalgia and then maybe you will, I don't know, receive this movie better. It'll give you all the warm and fuzzies because I might not end this movie or this story the way that you might want me to. But if I give you enough nostalgia, maybe you'll feel warm and fuzzy, so it'll be okay.
And the weird thing is, with the ending that we got, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's the ending of the series or ending of the franchise or anything of the sort. It almost feels like it's just asking to continue, which then begs the question, why are we calling this the final reckoning? Why are we saying that we're wrapping everything up? And it's very much mixed messaging. It's like saying on the one hand, hey, this is the end, come see it, trying to drum up the uh,
Mm-hmm.
idea of like, well, this is the last one. We have to go see this film. But then ending it in a manner where it's like, well, it's open to more films if we want to do it. And so it's like pick a lane. If you're driving down the road, you either gonna, go in the left lane or the right lane. It's like you got to get in one lane. You can't just straddle the middle. And I feel like with this film, especially with the ending of it, it's straddling that line of, well, we're ending the series, but we're not ending it because, hey, we can bring it back. And it that was something too. And I we probably can discuss more of like the specific ending to this film and what worked and what didn't work. But yeah, I don't know if we actually can say that this is the ending. Like, there have been mixed messages of like, well, this is definitely Tom Cruise's last Mission Impossible film. But I think in some interviews, McQuarrie has said, yeah, we're talking about maybe doing some more, and maybe even having like Glenn
No.
Powell
Mhm.
come in and do it. And so,
Oh.
yeah, so again, it's trying to say it's the ending, but it's not really the ending. And even in the film, it's like, what exactly is
Mhm.
the final reckoning? Because and even at one point,
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
Briggs mentions the literal final reckoning, and there really isn't one. So, yeah, it's very much a mixed message kind of a film.
That was gonna be one of my questions for you both is, do we actually think this is the last Mission Impossible movie? Because that ending leaves so much up for more IP. And I'm like, the capitalist machine is alive and well. This is an iconic franchise. It gets butts and seats. Why would they end it here? And to your other point, Michael, I do feel like the way that the character arc happens for Ethan, I don't think we got a final reckoning. I think he has a bunch of conversations over the course of the film where characters are saying, you're always like this. This is your pattern. You've made all these choices and people have paid for them. You've never been able to protect the people that you care about. But I also feel like at the end, there isn't actually like a big change or a big character moment or a big step forward for him. Again, why I was thinking about the James Bond, Daniel Craig chapter, because that final movie, the character makes such a specific choice that is so different from who he's always been over the course of his movies. He's always been disconnected, trying to not get invested in the people that he cares about. And his final moment in that movie, I guess spoiler for the last James Bond Daniel Craig movie, which I forgot the name of. It's like Spectre or something. I can't remember the names. But his final choice is to self-sacrifice out of love and care for his people that he's invested in, which has never been a choice that he's made before. He's always been a lone wolf. And so that's like a big character moment that feels kind of fitting for a big ending. Whereas I feel like this one, I feel like Ethan's still Ethan. He doesn't really change or grow significantly over the course of the film. And so I don't think the final reckoning that they play up actually ever happens for him.
I'm so glad you brought up No Time to Die. Like that.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did, because yeah, it reminded me of that film too, because of, that film had to try and tie everything up with its
Mm,
ending. I think with that film, I had wished that James Bond had lived, because I think that it would have been a better character story for him to have, had the happy ending, so to speak, with I can't remember the character's name, and their
yep.
son,
Yep.
but have that be there. Whereas with this film, I think it would have been better to have had Ethan make the sacrifice, because we see him falling out of the airplane, which, by the
Mm,
way, kudos to that whole stunt with the airplanes and everything. That was another great
neat.
moment. But he's falling out of the airplane, his parachute catches fire, and so he's falling down. He's scrambling to try to put the poison pill on the drive. It would have made sense to have had him get it on there and then, crash and burn and sacrifice
Mhm,
himself, and that be the ending. And then, like, everybody
mhm,
else, can, live on in honor and working, in the memory of Ethan. And I think that would have had a better moment of resonating with people, because of everything that had led up to that. And it's like Ethan making the ultimate sacrifice
yeah.
in what he did. But instead, it's like he miraculously survives. And then we have the moment where Kittredge and
Ugh.
Briggs catch up with him, and Briggs is pointing the gun at him. And I thought, okay, here's where the final reckoning is going to happen. And Briggs is going to shoot him because, he is so obsessed with avenging what happened with, his dad and everything. But no, he hands the gun off and shakes his hand, and then they just walk off. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here? And then the actual ending with everybody meeting up in London, and they have the drive, which still has the entity in it. So the entity is still technically
Mm.
exists, but it's in this drive, and everybody just walks away. And it's like, well, the entity still is a thing. So
Mhm.
then there can be people, agents of evil, that want to try and take
Steal it.
it. And so
Mhm.
again, it's like you have a film right there that's waiting to be told, but that's how it ends. And so really, there's so many other ways that this film could have ended that I think if you wanted to say this is the final film, and whether it be Ethan makes his sacrifice or they destroy the entity and make that the final thing, there's so many things that you could have done with it, but instead it's just nebulous as to what happens, and Ethan just gets to walk away. Granted, he doesn't have his best friend Luther, and he doesn't have Ilsa, who was killed off in the previous film, which, by the way, I hate Rebecca Ferguson was not in this film. I wish that she'd been in it. Also, I hated that Vanessa Kirby was not in it either.
Mm.
And there was no
Yes.
explanation as to why she wasn't in it. There were several characters where it was like, why are they not in this film? And they don't
Mhm.
do any explanation. There's several things like that. Like, there's no explanation as to why Luther is sick. Like, they give no reasoning as to why. He's just, I guess it's just a way to say, hey, he's holed up here underground. He has to be sick. But I I thought that was kind of weird, and there was no explanation as to why Paris didn't get her retribution with Gabriel, because
Mm.
especially early in the film, Paris is like, I'm going to kill Gabriel. I'm going to kill her. And we even get the one part there in the bunker where Paris is going to shoot Gabriel, but her gun jams. And that was the last chance that she had, because Ethan is the one essentially that ends up killing Gabriel. And we get no resolution with that. And why even keep mentioning it if she's not going to get that retribution? I just thought that was just, those kind of things just kind of built up to it. And also to the character of Kittredge, because I feel like you brought this character back from the first film. He's in Dead Reckoning and he's here. He could have been a much more of an antagonist than he was, because he has that connection with Ethan. He could have been a much more solid villain than Gabriel was, because I feel like Gabriel in this film, even more so than Dead Reckoning, is just kind of a lackey. Like, he really has no like true agency of what he's doing. He's just kind of there. Even more so here, he just kind of goes with the motions and doesn't really have any kind of oomph to him like some of the other previous villains did. And having to try to rely on the entity to be that main villain when it's so nebulous as to why it does what it does and what its motivations are and everything. It just, there's so many things that just make me question why they chose what they chose with this film.
Yeah, there are some choices that were made in this film. That's for sure. I just, man, I would like, this is not going to happen because capitalism, but I would love if they just take Mission Impossible and we're going to put it on the shelf for like 10, 15 years and just let it sit there for a little bit. And then in like 10, 15 years, come out and like, hey, we're going to do this again with a whole new cast of people. And you can even bring up the entity again or whatever, because AI is only going to become more of a thing between now and then. So, like, just give us a break. We need a wee little break from seeing Tom Cruise, who is now over 60 years old, looks great, is doing incredible things, but he's over 60. I don't need to see this man jumping out of planes anymore. Like, can we just take a pause, take a break, come back to this in a few years, and just do a reboot? That is what I would like to propose. Plus, I don't want to see any of the Tom Cruise Mission Impossibles without Luther, because Luther is my guy, and they come as a package deal. So if you killed off Luther, I need this iteration of the series to be over. But I am just one person. They're not going to listen to me. But that is what I desire in my heart.
Yeah, I think there would be a good idea to give it a breather. And I think given the fact that Tom Cruise's schedule is kind of set up for a lot of other films, I don't think he would even really be able to do another Mission Impossible film the way that he would want to. So it would be really good to kind of have that reboot. Like, I mean, you could have like the remaining cast here, because there's some really great people here that you could, build a team off of, but have it go back to what Mission Impossible was really known for. It is the team element to it. I feel like that it did kind of become the Tom Cruise show, especially in the later films, and kind of less than what the original series and everything was this team. And they all had their different skill sets, and they had everything that they helped contribute to making the mission successful. And having that story element, I think, would be really cool, because, we have so many like spy films where it's just the singular person, that it would be nice to go back to having that team element to it. And another thing too, with like one of the story elements that I wish this film had gotten right or gotten better with, was the whole Children of the Atom, which was the whole like human element of people that were kind of like a cult that were worshiping the entity. They really could have used that a whole lot better. And I think that would have made it an even more compelling villain, because you would have had people that were the face of the entity, and as opposed to having some people do these like weird random elements, like the Secret Service agent trying to kill the president, or the person in the sub who is trying to take out Ethan, which, by the way, that was one that made zero sense, because that sub had been undersea throughout the entire part. And so the entity would have had no way of getting access into the sub, which they explicitly make a point about that too, is that the reason why it's down there is because it's a nuclear sub. We don't want the entity to get control of it. But here's this dude who is supposedly influenced by it. That's a whole other thing. But I really wish that they had used the Children of the Atom thing as a more compelling victim, and had it be more prominent, instead of it just being kind of like a couple of interview shots and a couple of random people doing random things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It could almost be like that, like John Wick moment when all of the assassins get the hit on, or get the notification about the bounty on John Wick, and so everybody's coming at him. Like, that would have been really exciting to see. And then like Ethan doesn't know who's coming after him. He's in all these like weird spots with all these people coming at him. That would be so much fun. And we know that he can, like, he's a really good agent. He's made it through all these movies. He could survive all of these dudes being controlled by the entity coming after him. But that would be so thrilling, and would provide some like really interesting like little set pieces throughout of, just creatively trying to stay alive as people are coming after you, which is always entertaining to watch.
And related to that, like Ethan having to figure out who he can and can't trust. I think that's one thing. I wish the film played up more of the AI bits. I thought that Dead Reckoning Part 1 did a really great job of showcasing how the entity is everywhere. It's always listening, and there's so many conversations where the characters are having to parse out, like, is this because the entity wants us to believe this? And how do we, like, kind of break out of the influence of the entity potentially shaping their plans. I thought that was really cool. There's less of that in this movie. But the one bit that I thought worked really well in this film is how much they discuss the concept of trust and how much the entity is going to bet on them being distrustful of each other. And the risk of trusting someone who you have no reason to trust is the ultimate leap of faith. And those moments made me really emotional, I think, because we live in a time where there is a lot of mistrust of society, of government, of other people groups that think differently than you. And just seeing time and time again throughout this film, these characters make these really scary leaps of faith that have a real cost to them, but they're choosing to trust each other. I thought that theme worked really well for the emotional beats of this movie, but then also kind of a fitting for the times point that the movie is making that was really, really effective. So I thought that they did a great job of not overdoing that too much, but when they needed to have like 3 or 4 of those big beats, I thought that worked really well. Okay, any other final big thoughts about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning before we wrap? Any other big things that we wanted to mention?
I want to give a huge shout out to Hannah Waddingham. I really loved her character as Vice Admiral Neely, who's in control of the George Herbert Walker Bush, or the USS George Herbert Walker Bush. She has just a small role, but she is really, really commanding and really had a great presence. And it was nice seeing her play a good guy because, like, a lot of times she kind of plays like the antagonist or the villain, and so it was really great seeing her here play a good guy, play a baby face, and so it was really, really enjoyable for that. I loved Holt McElhaney is one of the people in the security council or whatever, and he had the line of "You gave him an aircraft carrier." It just the way he said that line was just phenomenal. And then the captain of the USS Ohio, I wanted to make sure he got shout out. Tremel Tillman, who played Captain Jack Bledsoe, he had such a great role and was just great in keeping everything in control down there in that sub, and just kind of his facial expressions as to hearing what Ethan is going to do and everything with that was just great. And it was also funny too because the actor, when he was interviewed, mentioned the fact that he got the role because Christopher McQuarrie was a huge fan of Severance. And so that was how he got the role. And he just fit this film perfectly with his performance. And I hope people like Hannah and Tremel, they get more opportunities, especially like we had a couple of actors cross over from Top Gun Maverick to this film with Greg Tarzan Davis and
Yep.
I can't remember the other one's name, but Charles Parnell. It would they crossed over to this series. I'd love to see a couple of actors go from Mission Impossible to a potential Top Gun 3 because I'm sure that's going to happen, and so it'd be nice to have those because we already have seen that, and so it would be really cool. But wanted to make sure that they got shouted out because they had some great performances, especially given the fact that they're the new people coming into this series, and we already had so many characters from the last film come in. Just want to make sure they got shouted out.
Yep. I wanted to also shout out Hannah Waddingham and Tremel Tillman. So you got it, Michael. So ×2 to everything that you said. One of my favorite things about Captain Bledsoe specifically is the way that he constantly called Ethan Mr. And I cracked up every time because that's all he calls him is Mr. And I loved that. And so Tremel Tillman is such a wonderful actor. I also love him in Severance. He's one of my faves. So I was so pleased to see him in this film. And I hope, like you said, that they get more opportunities because both him and Hannah are such incredible actors. And so it's just nice to see them breaking out and being in more things. One of my silly little outstanding questions that I have quite a few, but I'm only going to focus on one, which is what happened to the dogs? They go on this whole dog sledding adventure. Where are the dogs? Because we go from the Arctic to the server farm. What happened to the pups? I have questions and I have concerns, and I just want to make sure that those dogs who are doing their job very well are well taken care of. That was a concern that I had.
I have to figure they either A, were sent home either by the plane or they rode them back home, or they're on the plane and they were just hanging out the whole time. So it's like they weren't neglected, they weren't, forgotten. They were either, back home or they're along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. I wish that the film had shown us the dogs are okay. Just set my mind at ease. But the film didn't do that. I understand it's already long. We can't have dedicated shots on just the dogs. But I was very concerned as they were romping around the server farm. I was like, but where are your dogs?
Well, after Grace pulls up Ethan from the ice, there's several days, it seems like, where they're just sleeping in the decompression chamber, and Donla's wife is just palling around. And I would just love a week-long vlog, daily vlog from that gal, just seeing how she's living her life. Because there's a wide shot afterwards where she's just bumbling around, and the chamber's just sitting there with our two protagonists in there. And I would just love to know, what is she eating? How is she going about her cooking? How does she spend her time? What's she reading? I would love a vlog from her.
Mm-hmm. ×2. That would be
So fun.
That would be lovely. This is the content that we want and need. Yep. I also think it's very convenient that they chose a 2-person hyperbaric chamber. It's good that they went for the double wide hyperbaric chamber so that both Grace and Ethan can just be hanging out in there for a few days, because that was really roomy. I was like, wow, this is a really nice space we got here, guys.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Well, the other thing I just wanted to say that I would like to see, it's not from the studios. It's actually from the two of you. I would love to see you two duke it out on Mission Impossible 1 versus 2. And I'll just be here with my popcorn watching that unfold.
Well, here's the thing. I liked Mission Impossible 1 all the way up to the Phelps reveal, because I feel like the film works really well all the way up to that point. And then it's the rest of the film is just, I can't even. I can't even. But 2, I know the faults that film has, and I mentioned them in my rescreen episode. There are faults because it's a John Woo film. It's 2000. It's of its time. But there are so many interesting elements. There's so many great actors in that film. Thandwe Newton is a phenomenal actress. I wish they had brought her back. That's another actress I wish they had brought back because she's phenomenal. But the story, too, is very relevant to today with the whole Chimera and Bellefonte and having this virus that can cause a pandemic, and, using that as collateral to milk the drug companies out of billions of dollars. It's very more
Sounds
relevant
familiar.
now than it was 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But there's good in that film, but there's definite flaws in it, too. But I have I don't necessarily hate the first film as a whole, just the way they treated Jim Phelps. And that's a whole on me. That's my thing. And, I know I'm in the minority there in that regard, though the original actors of the TV series hated that too. And at the time, they boycotted the premiere and wouldn't have nothing to do with it because of that. So I'm not completely alone in my thinking, but yeah, I know that 1 is more beloved than 2, but I so love 2. It's so fun.
Yeah, I don't know that we would have a duking it out, because 1 does have its flaws, and I can definitely appreciate that. And I see where you're coming from, Michael. And then 2 doesn't work for me because of all of the John Woo-ness that you just described. There's so many birds going on. It's so ridiculous. It does not work for me. But Thandwe Newton's character is so freaking cool. She is, to me, the shining spot in that film, and I wish that they had done more with her character. So there are some good things in number 2, even though it's so cringy to me and I don't enjoy watching it. But man, she is fantastic, and I love that character. I wish that they would have done more with her. So Jen, I'm very sorry. I don't think that we are the people to duke out what is the best Mission Impossible movie, because we would probably come to some sort of consensus and find some like middle ground, even though we very much disagree on these films.
By the way, I forgot to mention what is actually my favorite film is Fallout, which I would say, which I would argue should have been the ending of the series because it had such a great ending to it. So if you wanted to actually say, this is the final Mission Impossible film, it should have been Fallout because it ties everything up so very well. You have an ending with Ethan and Ilsa, and they go off and on their own, and they tie everything up with every other character, including his ex-wife, and tying that storyline up too. It was a perfect way to end it. It really has just great action in it, great story beats, everything with it. That to me is the best film of the series, and it was the perfect ending. But then they decided to do 2 more, and so we got what we got.
Fun fact, that movie was like in the middle section of my top 10 list of that year. That's how much I liked that movie, which is wild. I could not tell you the plot of that movie anymore, but I remember having an incredible time at the theater with that one. So, yeah. Yeah, that was not the duking out that I wanted. That was the most elegant, calm conversation that I've ever heard. You both are just like, yeah, I can see the good parts of this one. It had some problems, but I can see the good parts of this one. That was very pleasant duke out.
I'm so sorry to disappoint, Jen.
I'm here for like a dogfight, and y'all gave me like reconciliation and understanding, which is what we need here in 2025.
Well, I guess we'll have to choose another film next time to have that. But even then, I think we have a great conversation piece of how we get along and everything, and so I don't know if we'll necessarily have the around the horn or pardon the interruption kind of arguments here. I think we're more of like discussion, which is what we're about here.
We are. I love that. The world needs more of that these days, It's very good. Okay, well, this is our review discussion of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Big thank you to Michael for joining, sharing all of your thoughts about this franchise in general and this film. Always so fun and such a great time, such a joy to pod with you. We love it.
Yeah, I always enjoy coming on. It's always a fun, delightful discussion. When we agree, whether we disagree, everything in between. It's just great. It's nice to have a place where we can just have great conversations and really, interact and have those moments where we can find out things that we learned, share those, be enlightened, be encouraged. It's always fun and entertaining.
It's the best. We love it too. Well, our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today and with Michael. Michael, actually, where can people find more of you, connect with you, follow your pod, all that goodness on the interwebs?
Yeah, so you can find my podcast, the Screen Nerds Podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, wherever it is, you can find it there. I go into new films where right out of the theater, give my impressions, give my thoughts, and share those. And also favorite films, like I mentioned, Mission Impossible 2, did an episode of that where I share memories and thoughts of when I saw the film for the first time, and also my thoughts on the latest rewatch. And so you can hear all those in the episodes there. And then as far as like hanging out on the socials, you can find me on Twitter at Screen Nerds Pod, and then Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky just by searching Screen Nerds Podcast. And so again, thanks for having me on. It's always fun conversation. Always enjoy being on with y'all, and it's always a delight.
We love it. We will include all of those details, the links, the handles for Michael's show and where you can connect with him more on the internet in our show notes. So make sure to follow him. He has some amazing content and is such a fabulous human. So go connect with him more. We'll include that in the show notes. All right. Well, you can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about this Mission Impossible franchise finale ending. Parentheses for now, question mark. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at moviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesandUspod@gmail.com. Check out our website, andusmedia.co, for the latest on Movies and Us and our other podcast, TV and Us. We'll be back next week with a different episode format. You've seen Frame by Frame here on the feed. We have another one coming out soon for a scene from Sinners. That's right, it's the juke joint scene. It's that scene. We're excited to dive in and talk about that scene a little bit more and just go a little deeper with that one scene that is just so iconic and so incredible. So we're excited for that. In the meantime, we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.